Mic muted. Awesome. Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Theory Forge's Revivalcast. We have a special episode today where we've got guest developer host Snipe Hunter on with us, as you can see, in an awesomely themed getup for the show. So also, I'm going to pass it over to Adam, and he can kind of go around robin and introduce everybody too, and we'll get started here.
Alright, so I guess going on with introductions, I'm Astral Echo. Above me we have Cesara, who's back this week. Of course we have Snipe Hunter, our illustrious developer. He is the lead designer. Did I get that one right?
Absolutely. I'm mostly the systems guy.
Yes, yeah. So, what we've learned going into Founders IRC and all that is when we have systems questions, if Snipe Hunter's not in chat, they're not getting answered. They get passed off, which is good. Better that the person who's actually designing them can speak to them. And then, of course, above Snipe, we have Lux joining us again, and he's going to be handling a lot of the technical aspect as usual. And so, actually, for today, we have a system in place to track questions as they're being asked in Twitch. So if you do have questions, please post them. I don't know if there's a specific format that's needed for that, Lux, if you want to speak to that. But we are going to be pulling questions from the audience as well as part of digging into everything that Snipe Hunter has to tell us.
Yeah, you guys should catch in the scrolling marquee. If you put your question in brackets with Q or the word question, it will pick up by our bot, which I am booting up right now. So that is the way to do it.
All right, cool. So in that case, I think we can just sort of jump into this. So Snipe, do you want to talk a little bit about yourself and just how Revival came about before we get started?
Oh, yeah, sure. I've been, a game designer for, about 20 years now, since 95. Basically, I've been working on MMOs since Auto Assault in 2005, and I met Ombois and Kedron on that same project. And, ever since then, we've kind of been talking about what we really wanted to make in an MMO. And just as the years dragged on, we kept kind of noticing how everything we wanted was everything that was not getting put into MMOs. And so, for us, Revival kind of became the dream project of, well, if we could do it right, what would we do? And then a couple years ago, we started talking seriously about actually making it happen, and, here we are.
So I actually noticed when I was looking at Revival, I hadn't realized that it was previously announced in 2013. And that, there was a whole ton of screenshots from, I'm guessing, back when you guys were on CryEngine.
Yep.
So I guess between 2013, between the announcement that came out in November, obviously you guys switched over to UE4, and that required sort of redoing everything. But so what sort of snag did you guys hit that prevented you from moving on with the original project in 2013?
Mainly it was more about where IllFonic was at the time. We had a bunch of projects going, and they were all, admittedly kind of work for hire, right? But as a result, we were kind of stretched a little thin, and we just really weren't ready to put in the kind of effort that we needed to do it right. And so we sort of did mostly early prototyping, a lot of like systems proof of concepts. We worked out how to do the dynamic content and stuff, and then kind of, I wouldn't exactly say tabled it because I've been working on it the whole time, but did basically put it in the realm of theorycraft for like a year and a half, and then started real production just recently.
Getting attacked by my own microphone. So, yes, so that's interesting because I guess, I don't want to use the term cyber sock, but I've been sort of looking at how Revival has sort of come to be, and I noticed it looked like you guys were involved in, I believe the name was Skyward Star. Is that right? That was like a
absolutely.
Firm?
That's Ombois and I. Absolutely.
Okay. So is that I guess in terms of Revival itself, is that owned by Skyward Star? Is that owned by IllFonic? How did that relationship sort of come about?
Oh, gotcha. Actually, as Skyward, we worked on Nexus with IllFonic. We did a little bit of the background systems design and then all of the lore for Nexus. And so right around the time that we were doing that, we started talking about how we would do Revival for real. And, you know, we realized, well, there's no way in hell we can keep our consultancy going at the same time. So even though Skyward technically exists, Revival is all IllFonic. It's IllFonic's game. It's our team, right? Like, we are IllFonic.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I was totally wondering about that relationship, because I'm looking at this and I'm like, are these guys just there with IllFonic as sort of consultants? Or, you know, they talk a lot about Revival, but are they going to suddenly disappear a year through the game like we recently saw elsewhere? Because, I mean, you know, you guys are awesome. I would not want to see you off this team.
Oh, no, we're definitely committed to the bitter end.
Nice.
I was going to say, like, kind of talking about that, what kind of gave you guys a lot of your inspiration for, or where did you first get this idea for the emergent AI that you're planning to use? I mean, we saw, you know, a game like EverQuest Next kind of talk about that a couple years ago and bring it up. Is that something you guys kind of picked up within, you know, AI conventions or stuff like that you know, were like, this is something we want to add to our game?
We actually, Ombo and I came up with the idea when we were working on Rift. We wanted, in a way, we kind of wanted that game to be what Revival is shaping up to be. And so we came up with a ton of systems for doing things like real dynamic content, emergent AI. We had a design for an AI that would actually, like, control a kingdom. But ultimately, Rift really wasn't that kind of game, and so there really wasn't any place for those ideas. And so we sort of just stuck them on the shelf for a while. And then when Revival came about, we were like, hold on, let me dust that off, because this shit's awesome.
So, one of the things I noticed about the AI in Revival is it actually does sort of remind me of Storybricks, where, you know, you talk about this needs-based AI, where the NPCs sort of have these, they have these drives that affect what they're actually going after. Obviously, you know, Storybricks is no longer a thing, but I don't know if you've seen some of the stuff that they presented. I don't know if you ever toyed with the engine when it was available to the public. Do you think that what Revival is trying to accomplish is within that same vein? Is it something that's completely separated from that?
There's actually a ton of similarities. In fact, when they first announced, Ombo and I were both like, oh man, they're eating our lunch, right? But no, there are some differences. I mean, honestly, in a way, Storybricks is a lot more complex than what we're doing, but that's because they're trying to handle... so we do a lot of, like, little tiny gears that turn together and make a much bigger effect, right? And so we have a bunch of different systems to handle things that Storybricks would do all by itself if you were using Storybricks. And so individually our pieces are a little less complex, but the machine that they sort of come together to form is about the same.
So, moving beyond AI, when I look at Revival as a whole, and, you know, I can't help but make the comparisons to Star Citizens, because you guys do have that relationship with IllFonic, and you guys are sort of taking a similar... I don't want to say funding route, because, you know, you guys have said that you're not actually funding the game through the housing sales, but it's hard not to look at that and sort of see the parallels with the ship sales. So one of the other things that comes to mind when I look at Revival and I look at everything that's coming out about it, and then I turn to Star Citizen, is feature creep. Is that something that you guys are concerned about? I mean, you've mentioned that you have things that are prototyped out, and you're talking about this AI that it sounds like you guys actually had that semi-baked, if not in its complete form, through Rift. So are we looking at a lot of things where you have things that have been formulated already and they just need the time to be developed and polished? Or, you know, is there a risk of sort of reaching out and doing too much?
Well, there's always a risk. I mean, especially when you're working on a passion project, right? You know, if you're not careful, you'll let your passions run away with you until you've dug your own grave. But in our case, one of the benefits we've had is that we've been thinking about this for so long that a ton of the theory craft has been done for almost a decade, literally. And so what we have right now is we have a bunch of systems work actually in engine, you know, for things like scheduling and needs-based AIs and placing objects in your houses and stuff like that. But we also have hundreds upon hundreds of pages of already written and designed features for the game. In fact, I mean, boats alone is a 60-page document, and most of that is stuff that we've been talking about for like 5 or 6 years at this point.
So what's the actual timeline from when something is in theorycraft form to when it's coded and tested and deployed into the game? I mean, if we're talking about 60 pages on boats, what does that translate to in development time?
It depends on the features. So things like boats, some of that's going to come online really quickly. Easily half of that document is about buying boats, selling boats, customizing boats, registering boats with nations, and all of that kind of stuff is going to come on sooner than, say, movement and combat, but that's the other half of that document. And so, our roadmap kind of determines when we're going to bring stuff online and how much focus it's going to get at that point. We don't really like to talk about actual like dates and times because we don't ever want to get caught saying it's going to happen at a certain date or something like that. But generally speaking, we'll get from concept to complete implementation over multiple phases for big systems or over individual phases for little systems. Placing an object in a house doesn't take a hell of a lot of work, for example.
So are you thinking, like if boats are this multi-phase system, would we see boats potentially in something like Phase 3 or even Phase 2 where we can explore the entire island outside of our houses, even though we might not necessarily be able to sail or fight with them?
You'll certainly be able to, at a bare minimum, walk on your own boat. We kind of want to put a test bed in the game, and it's not on the schedule or anything like that, but before we actually get to implementing the coastline, which is, Phase 2, Phase 3, we were actually thinking about trying to get like a bathtub essentially set up so that you could at least have your boat on the water and sort of have a look at it. But that's kind of a stretch goal, so that's not, on the schedule or anything like that. But it seems like we can pull that off with the stuff that we've been doing so far. And so if we can do games like that, we definitely will.
I remember reading that there should be resource gathering and crafting before it goes online. Do you think that if people crafted some items, they would be able to keep it by the time that went online?
Actually, we're not. Yeah, it absolutely did. We're not really sure yet if we're going to let you keep the stuff that you do offline. The reason for letting you guys do it offline is to give you guys early access to the crafting system and give us a chance to sort of, QA it before we allow it to go live and be part of the real database. And so chances are you won't get to save the stuff that you craft offline, but I honestly can't say for sure yet.
Yeah, I think that'll be an interesting thing to see because I would imagine for a lot of people that would give them another incentive to buy a house while they can and get early access. But of course, just getting to use the tools and get that experience and also have some fun before the game goes online is a great incentive as it is.
That's definitely the hope.
Yeah, I really like the difference you guys are doing in your crafting system mechanics. I look at a recent title kind of for an example with Landmark. They had, you have early access and they had crafting things in there, but there wasn't any skill relation to it. So, for somebody like me, the fact that there are wipes looming and that things won't be persistent, that we won't get to keep objects, is kind of a big turnoff. Whereas, the way you guys are planning to do a lot of crafting, skill-based stuff, that gives people a lot more reason to, jump in and help test without, having this disconnect of I'm not going to have this stuff. So, are there any other things like that you guys are doing with other systems, crafting and otherwise, that kind of are leaning towards things like that?
It's actually mostly crafting. That was our huge concern. So, crafting is sort of like the flagstone for the economy, right? And so we have to get it right before we let anybody use it, quote unquote, for real. And so that's why that's the big concern there for us. The other thing that we might not bring online at first is like the consequences of the death system. So we probably haven't talked about it publicly yet. I might be spoilering here, but every time you die, it gets a little bit harder to come back. And considering that we haven't balanced and tuned combat, that seems kind of like a lame thing to inflict on people immediately, if you know what I mean. And so certain things like that we might let you guys play with before we let it matter. And the real question for us is like how to do that. And so, for example, with the Spirit Decay stuff, we're probably just flat out not going to bring it online and test it locally until we're pretty happy with it, and then bring it online for you guys. But other systems will probably let you play with. Well, no, you know what? I don't know. I think that's probably the only one at the moment.
So you mentioned death, and that's going to be a very interesting experience. Is there going to be sleep in the game, and will there be maybe dream experiences?
Oh, okay. So that's a really good question. That's actually one of my pet projects. Is we wanted to build a system that made sleep matter beyond just some sort of generic buff, right? Which is typically what you get when you log out near a bed or whatever. And so we've created two separate systems. One which takes advantages of the planes, and another which takes advantage of the fact that we know you're logging back in when you log back in after you've been rested. And so in the first case, sometimes if you go to sleep, something might happen to you, and you might find yourself transported to a place called the Dreamlands, which is a Mythos reference if you haven't read the Dreamland Chronicles. And so sometimes when you log in, you might find yourself somewhere else. Sometimes you'll log in and everything will be normal, and you'll just get a mana regeneration buff for the fact that you were sleeping. And the quality of sleep in bed that you slept on matters too. So sleep outside, you're not going to get as good a debuff as if you sleep in a nice deep feather bed or something like that. But the other thing that can happen is that you can get, if the signs are all right and if stats are all right, you can get what we call visions. And you can log in and you'll get almost like cinematics, but you'll get these glimpses into potential terrible futures or things that are happening elsewhere in the world. And the idea is that, if you can properly interpret them, you'll have an understanding of maybe something that's about to happen or something that is happening somewhere else, so that it can sort of guide some of your experiences. Visions won't be for everybody. It'll be relatively rare, but the idea is that, this is a world under siege by sort of cosmic forces, and sometimes they're going to bleed into your perceptions in ways that you didn't expect or normally understand, and so visions are a part of that.
Very cool.
So is this something that players have some potential to manipulate, or is it like complete RNG?
For most people, it'll feel completely random. It's actually not random, literally at all. However, there is a branch of magic called divination that you can use to force these and other sort of glimpses into the future and portents. For example, if you're really good at divination, with a deck of cards, you can effectively do a tarot reading for somebody, and if you can interpret the symbols correctly, get a sense of what tags are on that person.
You got me so excited. I love tarot reading, and it has always been a huge thing with me in MMOs, so yes, please do that. Very much so. Let's do divination.
Yeah, we're definitely pretty stoked about it.
You're speaking all of our language here, I think. Just all these concepts of things that you always want to see in a game that never necessarily get fleshed out. Which again, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, oh my god, this is wonderful, but oh my god, feature creep. But I threw money at you guys. I'm trusting you, so here's hoping. So, since you mentioned tags, this is actually a question that I saw coming through elsewhere. I think it was maybe even last week's stream, or maybe it was in Founders IRC at one point, and I don't think we actually saw an answer to this. But you mentioned that someone who's doing divination could read someone else's tags. Do players have the ability to see their own tags?
Not by default, no. You could do your own tarot reading, though. I mean, you were never literally going to go, you have these tags. So, like, even with tarot reading, there's I think 56 cards in our version of tarot. Anyway, there's a certain number of cards in the deck, right? And each card can have a number of tags associated with it, and we're never going to tell you what those are, right? So when I pull, the Fool, right, that could mean, that you're under a guise. It could mean that you're heedless of the danger that's about to happen to you. It could mean a bunch of different things. It really depends entirely on the tags that you have and which cards they're associated with.
Interesting. So would the cards themselves be something that the players would be aware of? Or is this still more one of those things where the players have to discover the meanings over time on their own?
There'll probably be books in the world that will tell you how to do basic readings and stuff like that, though how accurately the cards depict what's really there depends on your divination skill. So if you're a noob, it's effectively just random card pools.
Okay, so like you're not we're talking about levels here, but you're a level 1 tarot reader and you pull like the executioner and oh hey, you're gonna die tomorrow. No, not really.
Right, exactly.
It'd be a little frightening.
That could be very fun. You mentioned books, and I'm super into that. And I was reading the blog about it, and I was curious. What was the person's name? There was an example of a user, I think it was Tobin, that would make a book. Tobin writes a guide. So what would that mean to create a book in Revival, and how much freedom would we have when we do this?
So you'll be able to write literally anything. I mean, I'm a little nervous that what we're going to end up with are a lot of books where you open them and they just say dick, 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 dick. But that aside, you'll be able to write anything. Every book that gets written ends up in front of the eyes of a storyteller on a gold server, right? And so if those books are in some way useful, or if they're particularly well done in character, the storytellers may go in and add tags of their own. That said, if you copy pages of your journal, some of the tags that you've gotten that are related to those journal entries will also make it into your book. And we haven't really talked about the journal at all yet, so I'm probably talking about stuff nobody understands. We don't have a quest log. Let me just go over it really quick. So we don't have a quest log at all. There is no open up a list and see the to-do list of things that you're supposed to do. What we have instead is kind of like a diary. And you can add your own entries into the diary all that you want, but generally when you speak to someone, there'll be a small line that says something like, today I met Bob, the baker, and he bakes cakes, right? And most of these entries are going to be innocuous, and they're not going to really have any sort of gameplay value other than reminding you of the things that you did. However, sometimes you'll be like, hey, I talked to Bob, and he told me that there's this thing called Dagon out on the water. I don't think I want to go out on the water anymore, right? And that entry will have associated with it, a tag that says, hey, I've heard of Dagon, right? And so if you copy your journal entry, that tag very likely will go into the book as well, and so other players can learn of Dagon by hearing your account of what you heard.
That is awesome. As somebody who's a writer, I love the fact that us telling stories and us interconnecting with people around us in the game is going to really make a huge impact. It seems like, especially, you mentioned you don't have the traditional quest log, which is kind of like a really linear guide system, that developers have used in their games for the longest time for content. I really like the fact that you guys are steering, content into this sandboxed, it's almost like user-generated content, even though it's not necessarily user-generated content. We just are content for each other. So that is really awesome. Is there anything specific about books that can, I don't know, I guess what I'm trying to say, is there anything about books that can become permanent in the fact of maybe canonize things or lead to future lore that is established like that?
Absolutely. More so, I think, on gold servers than anywhere else, of course. But all of the books that Ombo and his team are putting together right now are kind of meant to be seeds for content that you guys will discover as you play, right? So, for example, actually, I don't want to give a real example. So, to give a hypothetical example, there might be a book somewhere on Crown's Rock that tells the story of a grave from, one of the first monks that settled the island, right? And that grave is lost. Nobody knows where it is. Reading the book might give you enough tags that in talking with some of the monks, you may be able to figure out where that is, open up that grave, and suffer whatever consequences are related to it. If you were to then go and write a book of your account, that book will get the crap tagged out of it by the storytellers, so that when other people read your book, they'll gain knowledge of what happened, and any of the ongoing consequences will then be open to them as well. So let's say, for example, if that grave contained a spirit, right, or a mummy, an undead, immortal guy, right? If he escaped and didn't die, that would go into your account, and then other people would become aware of this guy, and they might be able to then find some of the clues related to where he's hiding, what he's doing, etc.
Now, is that something that relies on the player to actually retell that story? Or, I mean, let's say that this player does make this discovery and this mummy escapes and, could potentially still be out there for other players to learn of and find and attack and all that. If that first player never writes a book telling his story, if he never copies his journal, if he never says something in chat that shares the tag if such a system exists, is that just dead content?
Oh, no, absolutely not. So we have a concept that we call agendas. And agendas are kind of like storylets or like television episodes. So let's say, for example, our mummy was imprisoned there by the monks originally because he, turned to necromancy in the early days of the island and started to raise a zombie army. When he wakes up, he's probably going to want to keep doing that. So his agenda is raise a zombie army. And he has a series of needs and potential game actions, and even in some cases some scripted events that are all related to that agenda, right? Successfully executing them furthers that agenda till eventually he'll accomplish it. So nobody stops that guy. The dude who lets him out just runs in terror and goes, wow, that was weird, and nobody else knows. He's going to quietly raise his zombie army somewhere on the island until it's big in the town, and then one day it's going to be zombies all over.
And there goes my house. No, but this is actually interesting to hear, because this is sort of getting back to, we talked about your work on Rift and how that was sort of a precedent of Revival. One of the things that I always wanted to see in Rift, or even what my original expectation was not that these were static events that, they grew, but they didn't really grow that much. But that, if left untouched, instead of just timing out, these rifts would actually grow and follow whatever their individual cult's purpose was. If it's to destroy everything, if it's to take over the minds of everyone in the area, that they would actually construct fortresses and start to take over towns and quest hubs and things like that.
Exactly.
And that never came to pass. But yeah, that sounds like the direction that we're going with, which is just... I can't wait. I have no words.
Well, it's kind of... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, cool. I was just going to say, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because in Revival, this was planned from the get-go, right? In Rift, we came up with the idea of doing dynamic content, and then we're like, whoa, you could totally do stuff like this. And everybody was like, oh my god, no. There's no way. They're terrifying me. Shut the hell up. And so we ultimately didn't do it on Rift, but we're not letting people shut us up this time.
Yeah,
I think... Oh, sorry.
Alright, I was just going to say, I thought of a question when Astral was talking about, how the house getting destroyed, and then he kind of went on about, the fact that things can be destroyed and changed, and there's all this permanent stuff going on in the world. In the dev vlog you guys posted this past week, I was kind of like thinking about how that might apply to stuff. You talked about, how ships can run aground, or, ships can possibly be destroyed, obviously, if there's combat as well. So, if that's the case, are there ways for players to get their homes, whether it's a ground home or a houseboat or ship, repaired and back out on the water? Will those mechanics kind of relate to housing on land, too?
Absolutely. So, with boats, we have a concept of salvage, and to be fair, we actually expect that most people who attempt to salvage wrecks won't bring them back and fully repair them, because that's going to be a very expensive and costly process as far as in-game resources go. You'll have to find a shipwright, you'll have to get the wreck to a shipwright, which is in and of itself a challenge. So honestly, we expect houses to benefit from it more than ships. Ships, we expect people to salvage the things that were in the ship more than the ship itself. That said, we do have protection plans so that if your ship is sunk, you can get a voucher to go get a new one from a shipwright or something like that. But with houses, if we flatten your house, Cthulhu rises and he steps on your house and you're like, oh my god, that was a mansion that cost me an insane amount of money. It's okay. As long as, you can get back to that spot and you can hire the carpenters or be a carpenter, you can rebuild what was there. The bigger the house, the longer and more resource intensive that process will be, but you can definitely rebuild what was lost. On the other hand, if the house is just gone, the whole flooded lava example that I gave in the forums, no one's going to come help you fix your house, man.
Lava imps, hello. And I'm pretty sure the undead don't have a union, so I mean, I don't know. Those guys will work for cheap.
I didn't think about zombie labor. That's interesting.
Yeah, the brainstorming session, right? Crap, and now I completely forgot what I was going to say.
I have a question. Is there
Sass,
any
you
way
take
to permanently, besides Cthulhu flattening your house and it being impossible to rebuild because of the circumstances, is there any way to permanently lose your house? There have been some people talking on the forums about possible ways to make it so that people who bought houses aren't, and then for whatever reason, I mean, I'm sure no one will, but say someone does decide to stop playing the game. What's going to happen if there are a lot of houses that users aren't living in? Because I know the NPCs are supposed to be really robust and vibrant and be doing things in the city that you can interact with, but I have been reading on the forums that some people have concerns that people might leave and then they have these houses. So is there a way that will people have to check in every so often, or can we assume that if we purchase a property that we'll always have at least that land?
Well, yeah, actually, you can totally lose your house. If you, I realize that sounds dreadful, but if you don't pay your taxes, eventually the government's going to come seize your house, and they're going to put that house back out on the market, and somebody else is going to buy it. It's a long process of tax delinquency before that happens, but that is totally possible. So if you quit the game, I mean, you won't care you quit, but what'll eventually happen is your house will get seized, and then later it'll show back up on the DNI site.
Okay, so taxes are in, because last time I could be reading something outdated, but last time I was reading about it, that wasn't for sure yet, but there will be taxes.
Yeah, we've called them different things over the course of the development, but yeah, originally we called it upkeep. You don't pay the upkeep on the house, eventually you'll go delinquent, right? But it's the same concept either way. We're calling them taxes now because they're assessed once every real-time month, which is about once every quarter in Revival, so they kind of feel like quarterly property taxes.
Now, for those taxes, for the tax system and the ability to actually lose a property that you've invested in, what kind of mechanics, if you can talk about it, what kind of mechanics do you guys have in place for, say somebody, has an emergency or they're gone for a year, or say they quit the game, for a year or two and they want to come back, will they get at least some partial amount of their initial investment to automatically invest back into a new property?
Yeah, so we're technically still working out the details, but the general idea is that you'll get a voucher that is somehow equal to the value of the house or what you paid for it, whichever was smaller. So, for example, if the house is only worth $50 a day, but you paid $200 for it originally, you're only going to get the $50, right? But that way you can buy an equivalent property when you come back to the game. I don't know if we're going to let, so for example, one of the things I really liked about UO is that you used to be able to send their support a message that was like, hey, I'm going to Australia for 3 months. I'm not going to be around. Can you suspend my account? And so we may do something like that. I don't know. But I kind of hope that we do, so that for people who are aware of what, long-term disruptions, they won't have to buy a whole new house when they get back. But generally speaking, if you're absent but do come back, there should be some way for you to get at least some of the value that you invested back.
Awesome. Yeah, I was hoping that would be there would be some form of way, because it seems like you definitely don't want to have that situation where a player feels like they don't want to return to a game and become a paying customer again because of something they've lost. So that was really good to hear. I'm glad to see that.
So since you mentioned potentially buying a house for $200, then the value only being $50, being the influencing factors in terms of that value? Is that something that you guys are looking at diminishing over time? Is this something that's impacted by, NPC populations?
Yeah, so status of the city changes so I should probably pull the curtain back a little bit and explain how the values on houses kind of work. I'm not going to lay out the exact math because we do want some amount of gray here, but the idea is that every house model and variant has a base value price that we as the designers have set. That price is then modified based on the safety, affluence, and location of the neighborhood that it's in, as well as its location within the neighborhood. So if the affluence level of a neighborhood changes, or if the safety level of a neighborhood changes, or if foot traffic changes so it's no longer a prime location, that will absolutely affect the value of a home. What we actually expect to be the bigger modifier of home value will be actual sales once we figure out a way for players to be able to sell houses. I can't guarantee that we're going to let that happen, but that's totally the plan, and so we expect that's going to make the market more volatile than it would be otherwise.
That safety factor is a really intriguing mechanic, just because somebody who's invested a lot in a home is going to want to make sure that it retains its value. So these influential people, or people with mansions and estates, are going to need to be influential in their local communities to keep the value of their home up. That's a really really interesting mechanic.
Yeah, that's definitely what we're hoping to see. When we were figuring out the ecosystems for cities, one of the things we wanted was to be able to have people who own houses literally put roots down and make the world a better place by being there. And so we had to figure out ways to sort of let that happen. And I'm a fan of comic books, so I want Batman. I want people patrolling their own streets. I want blocks locked down. So that's definitely a huge piece of the mechanic there.
So is this? I'm trying to sort of envision how this might be calculated, and one of the fears that's coming into my head right now is, let's say that we're calculating the safety of an area or its reputation based on the collective karma of all its residents, or something like that, or maybe how many people have died in this area, how many murders are occurring on your block on a daily basis. If you're looking at, let's say, some Zerg PvP guild, that sole focus is to just gank everyone at all times of the day and completely desolate an area to drive down the houses and pick them up when they're at complete lowest value possible. Is that a valid gameplay avenue?
In theory. I mean, realistically, the hope is that the people who live in the neighborhood will attempt to make that not happen. And on gold servers, it's less likely to be as impactful in a single event as it would be on a standard server. And the reason for that is that, if nobody calls the guard, the storyteller still can, right? And so they can maybe, what's the word I'm looking for, diffuse the situation a little bit more cleanly and quickly than players can. But that said, you kind of are responsible for your own neighborhood, and so if you let the ravaging horde in, that's what happens.
Going off of that, what could happen to players that are just entering the game in open world PvP? I know this is kind of going off of the house thing, because I know some people have been scared about what's going to happen to their house. The other fear that I've seen in the forums is people being scared that they're going to enter the game and they're just going to die so many times.
Yeah, so that's something we talk about a lot, actually. The good news is that cities aren't going to be necessarily as dangerous as the worst case scenario makes them out to be, right? So Crown's Rock is a perfect example. Crown's Rock is kind of like, in comparison size and scale, it's kind of like a rural town, right? It's kind of a small town. But even as a small town, it has 2 jails and like half a dozen guardhouses that each support 3 full shifts every day of guards to patrol the area. So it's not as dangerous everywhere in the city as you might think. And there are some seriously harsh penalties for breaking the law in a city. Guards, for example, won't necessarily drag you off to trial depending on what you did. So, for example, if you're shanking somebody in an alley and a guard walks by, you're probably going to get a knife in the back or a sword across the neck, and you're probably not going to be around to worry about the repercussions afterwards. And so, when players start the game, they can choose the cities that they start in. Right now, we only have Crowns Rock, of course, but Crowns Rock is actually a generally peaceful city. It's relatively safe. Some cities will be a lot wilder. For example, at any given time, we're going to make sure that there is one what we're calling a red city and one what we're calling a blue city on the map, right? And so a red city might be a pirate port or a city dedicated to like Hydra or something, right? A city where, you know, blood maybe literally runs in the streets. And so those are not the places I would want a newbie to start if they were worried about PvP. But on the other hand, there's also, you know, Crowns Rock, basically, which is kind of like a blue city. Crowns Rock is actually a gray city, but it's very close to blue. And in a blue city, you're going to find a lot more guards. You're going to find NPCs that are way more willing to intervene on your behalf. You're going to find a lot harsher penalties for breaking the law. And it's just generally going to be a lot safer. And so that's where I would expect new players to start.
Awesome. Well, we are going to transition into audience questions now for like the last 20 minutes here if we can, and we're just going to kind of go round robin and ask some of them. The first one we have is from Diggs. He asked, we might not have character aging, but will we be able to create characters that are elderly in appearance, like 50, 60 years old?
Yeah, we actually haven't decided the age range that you can play through yet because, admittedly, we haven't completely taken aging off the table. It's a pet project of mine, and damn it, I want it to work. But you will definitely be able to create characters that range in age from, you know, at least young to late middle-aged, if nothing else.
Awesome. The next question is by Zendrit. He said, what will the level of effort be in character creation and appearance? Can you compare it to any other game currently to shout out to?
I can definitely tell you what some of our influences are. So we were hella impressed by Black Desert's character creator, for example. So we want players to be able to do everything from, you know, change their body types and sizes to, you know, adjust their nose to look like it's been broken, right, to apply scars and tattoos. Like we have a whole ton of plans, though honestly what's in the game right now is super rudimentary, so I can't really talk about what we are doing. I can only talk about what we want to do. The other thing that we want to do, though, and this does limit what you can create with the character creator, is that we want your abilities and stats to be reflected in your actual physical build, right? So if you roll a mage, you're not going to get him to look like Conan if you min-maxed it so that he was, you know, maximum intellect and minimum physique. He's going to be a scrawny dude, and there's really nothing you can do about that. The sliders will be bound by the attributes that you chose. But yeah, I don't know if that really answers the question, but that's kind of what we have in mind.
I really like that idea because, you know, I've always encountered difficulty where you run into characters who are supposed to possess some physical attribute, but it doesn't necessarily reflect on their stats. So I do like the idea of that being driven by attributes to a degree. Our next question is from Marek. Will the Revival team grow once the developers are freed up from Star Citizen? And secondly, will there be some sort of development calendar posted at some point in the future? This one I think I asked you about in IRC, the idea of a schedule and sort of a roadmap and goals that we might set for different phases.
Yeah, so you know, we have a sort of overview of our roadmap right now on the site, and for a while that's probably going to be the best that you'll have as far as like a full-blown schedule goes, but we're also eventually going to put all of our documentation online. So eventually you'll be able to see for yourself exactly what each of those bullet points in the roadmap actually means, right? We're going to put up a wiki, basically. You know, we'll be the only ones allowed to write to it, but you'll at least be able to see all of our cross-reference design documents and see what plans are, what phases things are rolling out. So that's probably as close as you'll get as far as like a roadmap goes. We're never, ever, ever going to give dates. We're just not. We burned ourselves too many times on past projects, basically. What was the first half of that question again?
When the when the Ilphonic devs are finished up with Star Citizen, will that be something that transitions to Revival?
Potentially. Honestly, we generally keep our teams separate. So, if somebody's assigned to Star Citizen, they'll be on Star Citizen till the very end. If somebody's assigned to Revival, they'll be on Revival till the very end. We are going to expand the team basically whenever we need to. So if Star Citizen happens to be over when we expand, we'll certainly grab the people who are awesome on that team, because why wouldn't we, right? But that's not going to stop us from additionally hiring more people if that's what we need to do.
All right. The next question is Sanderval asks, are you still meticulously hand-pinning the housing map?
I actually finished that last week. However, there's a ton of bugs I have to fix because apparently I didn't finish it well.
So there's no date on the map. Ooh, cat's going crazy.
The next question is by Sailkite. He asks, stemming off of Jintara's question, in what phase do you hope to bring character creation into the game?
Before phase 3.
And then after that one, it is, some of these go by quick, hard to keep up. Assuming we get, by another one by Sanderval, assuming we get visions, will they be available to view again, or one time and better burn it into your memory?
More the latter than the former, though we'll probably also auto-generate a journal entry for you when you have a vision.
And I'm sure a lot of visions you'll never want to view again if you can avoid it.
Alright, the next question is by Diggs. He says, where can we find reference for the Sheepland Chronicles, or Sleepland Chronicles? Dreamland, I believe you said it was? No.
It's actually the Dreamland Chronicles. And they're a series of stories that were written by Lovecraft and a few others, if I recall correctly. That said, they're actually bound together in an anthology called the Dreamland Chronicles that you should be able to find on Amazon or something like that.
So can we actually get the Sheeplands in-game as well? Can this be fun? It's like our cow level, right?
Exactly.
I believe this one is also from Matt. So player houses can be destroyed. How heavy will the cost to rebuild be, and will it take an enormous amount of resources and time for a player to rebuild their house?
It very likely will. I mean, it depends on the house. Rebuilding a cottage isn't going to take a lot of work, but rebuilding a manse is going to take a lot. And I don't have exact numbers on resources yet because we're still balancing the economic factors. But you're going to need a lot of wood. You're going to need carpenters. You're going to need. I mean, if you do it yourself, it's going to take a hell of a lot longer than if you hire other people too. I mean, try building a mansion by yourself.
Okay, well, this next question, I really hope the answer is yes. Trapjaw asks, can a book written by a player send another mad due to its content?
Potentially, depending on what you wrote down, absolutely.
Our next question here is by Circe1. He says, in most games the monsters are usually so densely packed that you can hardly swing a stick without killing 5 vampires. Are your encounters going to be less densely populated to keep them seeming more other and less familiar?
Absolutely. In fact, it's going to be a lot more like pre-Second Age Ultima Online if there are any old school UO players out there. You might wander quite a while before you find something seriously dangerous. Where you are will matter too. I mean, some parts of the world are substantially more dangerous than others, but around Kron's Rock, for example, unless there's some sort of supernatural, what's the word I'm looking for, incursion, chances are you're not going to see something terribly deadly unless you're out alone at, the darkest piece of the night in the middle of a blood red moon or something like that. And mind you, those are all kind of random examples, but the point is the signs in the stars and the confluence of events will have to be right for supernatural forces to intervene at all. So that's not going to happen all the time. Far more likely are things like, oh my god, there's a rabid pack of dogs out here, or something like that, and those are still going to be relatively few and far between around settled areas.
The Sheeplands have reached into the prime plane. This one is from Zendret. House destruction. So you were saying a house could be permanently destroyed, meaning I spent $400 and it would be down the crapper because of a GM event. And I know we sort of discussed this one, so I'm just going to quantify this a little bit better. Let's say that I do spend $400 and it gets destroyed, and let's say I forgot to buy a protection plan. Because I think what we've already discussed is that if you do have a protection plan, you are still in the clear to a degree.
Yeah, right, exactly. So if you're completely unprotected and your house is destroyed, you are probably not going to be very happy.
Nope. Okay. Well, Trapjaw asks, will NPC shops run out of stock, requiring them to buy new stock, or do they have unlimited resources the way they do in most MMOs?
No, they can absolutely run out of stock. In fact, they could run out of the base resources necessary to produce the things that they're selling and end up having to go out of business. This is all part of the whole economic health of a city thing. Basically, the closer they get to the end of their stock, the more expensive their stuff is going to become, and the more they're willing to pay for the base resources to produce more, assuming they don't have them. If they have them, then they'll just keep cranking out as much as they can sell. But they need those base resources to pull that off.
When NPCs are cranking out these items, are they same sort of time it takes to craft an item as a player would be? Is that still sort of a natural, if it takes me 10 minutes to craft a sword, is it going to take an NPC 10 minutes to craft a sword? Or are they just going to say, okay, well, I have the resources to restock by 20 swords, so here's 20 swords pooping into my inventory?
We want to do the former, but we may end up doing the latter, if that makes any sense. We have not yet implemented the NPC production pipeline, so I can't actually say how it's going to go, but our plan is to actually have them craft the goods, and so they'll not only need the time, they'll need the forge, which means they may not rent out the forge to other people because they have to make their own stock. That's absolutely what we want to do.
Diggs asks, is it confirmed 1 in-game month is 3 real months?
Yeah, other way around, actually. Yep.
Awesome. And the next one is by Donnie Ergo. He said, what about PvP safety? Kedron was talking about, does it mean that PvP only player, I won't be able to kill somebody just because they paid for it?
Potentially. You can purchase with SP what we call a Blessing of Protection. And a Blessing of Protection will prevent other players from attacking you. However, you will lose that blessing as soon as you attack yourself as well. But yeah, if somebody wants to spend all of their SP to protect themselves from PvP, they could probably do so. Realistically, though, the way SP is balanced, they're probably going to have to buy SP to do that. Because while you will make SP at a pretty healthy clip, you'll probably only be able to buy protection, 2 out of 7 days, something like that. That's the ratio we're kind of going for.
So Zendrit asks, will there be family systems?
So we're actually talking about that right now. So we've come up with an idea for making aging work that includes the concept of heirs, right? And so if we ultimately do execute on aging, then players will have family lines as well, complete with designating an heir when it's time for one player character to die. That said, NPCs absolutely have a concept of family lines. There's a whole vengeance mechanic related to, like, if you go murder Bob the Baker, then maybe his brother Bill will come after you and things like that. For that to work, we had to have those familiar relationships modeled. So they absolutely do. We're just trying to figure out how to make it work for players right now.
I really like that, considering how much that ties in with a lot of what Lovecraft writes about. There's a lot of the whole, my ancestors are actually very odd, and this is terrifying to me. So I would like to have that as a player. Lethality asks, can you talk in any more detail about the crafting skill progression, as you touched on in a forum post before, unless I'm making that up, Winky Face?
I'm not sure what was said before. So there is I mean, there's absolutely a progression through all of the crafting skills, but it's more related to. So we model crafting kind of, actually any of the abilities are kind of modeled as knowledge, right? And so the more knowledge that you amass for that crafting skill, the more you'll be able to do with the things that you have, and the more higher end recipes and the like will become accessible to you because you can finally understand to do them, right? So like, for example, Ombois makes glass beads just as a hobby, right? And he does it in the medieval style, and it's really, really cool. But if you ask him to make you something, chances are he's going to go, no way, dude, I'm an amateur. I'm not good at that. And the reason for that is the types of things that most of us think about in glass beads are actually super hard to do by hand. They're all done by, masters or by factories at this point. And he just doesn't have those techniques. And that's kind of what we're trying to model with crafting. So, when you first start crafting, cooking's a good example. There'll be some recipes that, everybody can do. Anybody can fry an egg. They might do it poorly, but they can fry an egg, right? On the other hand, poaching an egg takes a lot more knowledge and effort because you're going to end up with it too runny or too hard, right? It's kind of hard to poach an egg, unless you know a secret. But regardless, the idea there is that as you amass more knowledge, as your skill advances after you successfully apply the techniques that you've learned, more recipes become available to you. Once you've sort of capped out, all of the knowledge available, you become flagged as a master. And at that point, there are other options available to you. For example, you can choose a specialization. So, you go from glass blowing to glass dagger making, right? And now there's a whole line of recipes that nobody else except masters in glass can make, and only masters who have specialized in daggers, right? Which may be, I think, what he was talking about, actually, because the master professions are definitely the cool part of maxing out on your skills. And there are different master professions available for different skills, and they're generally combinations as well. So, like, to be a master glass dagger maker, you would both need to master glass making and smithing so that you could understand the qualities of a blade that you would want to impart into a glass dagger. But those two together will unlock the mastery of glass dagger making. That's not a real skill, by the way.
Yeah, I really like that you kind of went into skills. It kind of makes me think of another question I had earlier about the boats and stuff. With your ship process, your shipwriting process, or your even participating as a user of ships, how extensive do you expect skills to be in that field? Can somebody only be involved in ships, period, as like their only thing they do in the game?
Yeah, absolutely. Though, to be fair, we have made some concessions when it comes to ships so that any layman can at least steer a ship around, even if it's at the worst possible performance level. And that's just because we didn't want to lock ships out from people who didn't want to invest the time in being actual sailors. That said, the better you are at sailing and naval combat, the better you're going to be able to use your ship on the seas. There's sailing, naval combat, salvage, fishing. Damn, there's two more. I can't remember them, but there's 6 total skills involved in ocean going, right? And any one of them can actually lead to to the primary occupation of your time, depending on how you want to deal with it. So, for example, if you just want to be a sailor, you could be the best captain out there, and that could lead you to being a courier, that could lead you to being a smuggler, that could lead you to being a trader, or that could even lead you to being a navy captain and actually taking part in the nation states battles on the oceans.
Okay, well, it looks like we're pretty much done here. Thank you so much for coming and talking and answering our questions. I feel like there were so many things that we had no idea of, and so that's really cool. And some things we had some idea of, but have more clarification on. And because you were here, we usually do the book club. So Call of Cthulhu is going to be next week, and we're still going to talk about that. And I guess I'll pass it off to Astral to close out.
Astral, whose video is no longer working apparently. Hopefully my audio is coming through.
Yep,
looks like it still is, so that's good. So huge thanks to Snipe Hunter for coming out on the show and suffering through our lightning round of questions. It was definitely so many things that we had to get through, and we only have an hour to do it. So hopefully we can have you back at some point, maybe some of the other teammates. It'd be really nice to get into a deeper discussion about things. But the first time on the show, I definitely wanted to make sure that we got to get a lot of questions out of the way, and I think we learned a nice few secrets too. I think you let a few things out of the bag there, so hopefully you don't get yelled at by Kedron when he gets back from PAX.
Right, hopefully I don't get in trouble for that.
Well, thanks. As always, it was great to have you, Snipe. We're glad that you can make it on, and we're hoping, if you have any other developers that are interested in participating, jumping on and talking about the things they're expertise in, and kind of getting all the fans, I guess, familiar with some of the team members, we would love to have more of you guys. But thank you for coming and taking the time today. I know it's not a work day for you, at least not that I know of, so thank you for taking a couple hours out of your time to spend with us and the rest of the fans of the game. But that is it for us. We are at the end of our show, so we are going to thank you guys all for showing up, submitting questions. As always, we will be back the same time next week, Sunday, 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. So join us again, and we will see you next time. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
I'm waving. You can't see me, but I'm waving.